A tractor worth nearly $100,000 vanished in broad daylight, and the security footage showed exactly who took it. The son of the Homeowners Association president climbed into the cab, started the engine, and drove it away as if it already belonged to him. When the rightful owner came to demand it back, the woman in charge only smiled and said that the rules of her association were stronger than any badge he could carry. The whole neighborhood believed the Morrison family was untouchable, that trouble simply slid off them the way rain slides off new siding, and that nobody in town had the nerve or the standing to challenge them. What none of them understood was that the quiet farmer they had spent 2 years trying to push off his own land was not just the last man holding the oldest deed in the county. He was a sheriff's deputy, and he was patient enough to let the evidence speak for itself, one document at a time, until the truth became impossible to argue with. The farm sat at the edge of town, 40 acres of red dirt and soybean rows that had belonged to the Turner family since the 1950s, back when the whole county was farmland and nobody had ever heard the words Homeowners Association. Jack Turner, 42 years old, spent his day off exactly the way he spent most of his days off, behind the wheel of an old green tractor that had been his father's before it was his. The machine coughed black smoke when it started and groaned on the turns, but it ran straight and true down every row, and Jack trusted it the way other men trusted a good truck that had never let them down. He wore a faded work shirt and jeans caked with dust, nothing on him that would suggest badge or authority, because today he was simply a farmer finishing what his father had started, the same way he finished it nearly every weekend of the year. Nobody driving past would have guessed that the sunburned man steering that tractor carried a service weapon in his truck and wore a deputy's star 5 days a week. Jack liked it that way. He liked the silence of the fields, the smell of turned soil, and the fact that out here nobody asked him to settle their arguments or explain the law to them the way people did back at the station. That peace had gotten harder to find since the new development went up along his eastern fence line, rows of beige houses with matching mailboxes and a homeowners association that acted like it owned the horizon, the creek, and everything else within shouting distance of its front gate. Linda Morrison, 55, had appointed herself president of that association the year the first house sold, and she ran it the way some people run a small kingdom, complete with committees, fines, and an unshakable belief that her own opinion carried the weight of law. She organized landscaping standards and mailed out violation notices with the enthusiasm of a woman who had finally found her true calling in life. She had decided early on that Jack's farm was an eyesore that lowered property values, an ugly reminder that not everything around her belonged to her, and she made no secret of wanting him gone from the moment the first house sold. The notices came steadily after that. Citations for grass grown too tall along the shared property line, complaints about the metal equipment shed sitting where it had sat for 30 years, objections to the sound of the tractor starting before 8 in the morning, even a formal letter about the style of his fence posts, as though wood grain were somehow a matter of public safety. Jack answered every notice the same way, calmly and on time, because he understood boundaries better than anyone in that subdivision ever gave him credit for. He mowed what needed mowing, adjusted what could reasonably be adjusted, and quietly refused what fell outside her authority, since his land had never belonged to her association and never would, no matter how many letters arrived in his mailbox. Linda hated that composure more than she would have hated a fight, because a fight she could win with lawyers and paperwork, but a man who simply would not react gave her nothing to push against, nothing to escalate, nothing to make an example of in front of the neighborhood. Standing at her mailbox one afternoon, arms crossed, sunglasses pushed up into her hair, she told him flatly that someday he would have no choice but to leave, that people like him did not last long against people like her. Jack only nodded and kept walking toward his barn, unbothered, the same calm he carried into every difficult conversation on patrol 6 days a week. He had learned long ago that people like Linda mistook silence for weakness, when in truth it was simply a man refusing to hand them the reaction they were fishing for. His father had run this same fence line for 40 years, dealing with drought, dealing with bank loans, dealing with neighbors who came and went, and none of it had ever once shaken him into raising his voice over property he already knew belonged to him. Jack figured a woman with a clipboard and a committee was not going to be the thing that finally broke that inheritance of patience, no matter how many letters she mailed or how many meetings she called, specifically to discuss his fence posts. He had no idea that on the other side of the fence, watching the tractor roll silently into its shed for the night, stood Linda's 28-year-old son, staring at it with the kind of hunger a man gets when he has never worked for anything and desperately wants to feel powerful for once in his life. Ethan Morrison had been unemployed for the better part of a year, living off his mother's reputation and her checkbook, coasting through his days on borrowed authority he had never earned. Lately, he had started talking about the farm next door as though it were simply a matter of time before it became part of the neighborhood he claimed to control, bragging to anyone who would listen that his family's influence stretched further than any deed ever could. That weekend, Ethan threw a party at his mother's house, string lights strung across the patio and a cooler of beer sweating on the table under the porch fan, and he held court the way he always did when an audience was watching him closely. He told his friends that the whole stretch of land past the fence would belong to his family eventually, that his mother practically ran the town through the association and nobody dared cross her twice. One of his friends laughed and asked what he was actually going to do about it, since talk was easy and land deeds were not. And the challenge landed exactly where Ethan's pride lived, right in the center of his need to be taken seriously. He brought up the tractor specifically, claiming it blocked the association's maintenance road, and gave his mother the perfect excuse to teach the farmer a lesson he would not soon forget. Linda, half listening from the kitchen while refilling a tray of appetizers, told him offhandedly to have it moved for a few days if it was such a problem, since the old man could hardly do anything about it out here on his own. She meant it as a throwaway comment. The kind of casual cruelty she tossed around without much thought. The way she tossed around most of her opinions about the people she considered beneath her attention. But Ethan heard something entirely different in her words, an invitation dressed up as permission, and by the time the party wound down he had already decided exactly what he was going to do. 2 nights later, long after the Turner farmhouse had gone dark, and the only sound left in the fields was the wind moving through the soybean rows, the association's security cameras recorded a truck backing a flatbed trailer up to the equipment shed. Ethan worked quickly in the glow of his phone flashlight, hitching the tractor and easing it up the ramp with more confidence than skill, scraping the paint along one fender in the process without seeming to notice or care. He hauled it into the association's maintenance building on the far side of the subdivision and pulled the license plate off the back, before locking the door, satisfied with himself, as though removing a piece of metal somehow erased the entire act from existence. By morning, Jack walked out to start his rounds and found the shed standing open, the space where his father's tractor had always sat now empty, except for tire tracks pressed deep into the dirt where the trailer had turned. He crossed the fence line that same morning, still in his work clothes, calm the way he always was when something demanded calm rather than panic, and walked into the association's small front office to ask a simple question. Linda sat behind her desk with the composure of someone who had rehearsed this exact conversation the night before, and when Jack asked where his tractor was, she looked at him with practiced confusion and said she had absolutely no idea what he was talking about. Ethan, leaning against the doorway with his arms crossed and a smirk he could not quite hide, let out a short laugh, as if the whole situation amused him more than it concerned him in any real way. He had chosen to come in person rather than send a formal complaint through the mail, believing that a face-to-face conversation gave people a fair chance to correct their own mistakes before anything became official or permanent. That instinct had served him well countless times on patrol, where half of every dispute resolved itself the moment 2 people actually looked each other in the eye, instead of hiding behind letters and lawyers. He extended Linda and Ethan that same courtesy now, standing in the doorway of the association office with his hat in his hand, giving them every opportunity to simply admit what had happened, and return the machine before things escalated any further than necessary. Neither of them took it. Jack pulled out his phone and showed them a still image from his own trail camera, one that happened to catch the edge of the road where the flatbed had turned in during the night. Linda barely glanced at it before waving it off, saying that a blurry picture from a farm camera proved nothing about who owned what, and that her association had every right to relocate equipment that obstructed a shared roadway used by residents. When Jack asked her calmly to point to the specific bylaw granting that authority, she paused just long enough for the silence to answer for her, then changed the subject entirely, mentioning some unrelated complaint about his fence line instead. A handful of residents had gathered near the office window by then, drawn by the tension the way people are always drawn to a scene about to unfold in a small town. Among them stood Sarah Bennett, arms crossed, watching the exchange with the careful attention of someone deciding exactly how much of what she had seen the night before she was prepared to share out loud. She had noticed the trailer pass her house well after midnight, headlights dimmed in a way that struck her as deliberate rather than accidental, though at the time she had simply assumed it was some late-night landscaping job for the association. Standing there now, watching Linda dismiss Jack's evidence with such practiced ease, Sarah felt the first uneasy pull of a decision she had not yet fully made, one that would matter far more than she realized in that moment. Linda raised her voice slightly, performing for that small audience, insisting that Jack was overreacting, and that his kind of temper was exactly why the neighborhood had needed rules in the first place. Jack never raised his voice back. Not once, not even a little. He simply told her that he would handle the matter through the proper legal channels, and turned to leave without another word, which seemed to frustrate her far more than any shouting match ever could have. As he reached the door, Linda called after him with a laugh sharp enough to carry across the parking lot, telling him to go ahead and call the sheriff if it would make him feel better, since everyone in town knew how these things usually turned out for people like him. She had no idea how literally he intended to take that suggestion. Jack drove home, parked his truck in the same spot his father always used, and walked inside to change out of his work shirt for the first time that day, folding it carefully the way he always did out of old habit. 20 minutes later, he stepped back outside wearing his deputy's uniform, the star pinned exactly where it belonged, his service weapon secured at his side. He pulled the footage from every camera mounted around the property, cross-referencing timestamps with the motion sensor logs and the GPS unit he had installed in the tractor years earlier after a run of equipment thefts had swept through the county. The registration papers, the insurance documents, and the maintenance records all came out of the same metal filing box his father had kept in the study, organized with the same discipline Jack brought to every case he had ever worked in his career. Before making any calls, Jack sat at his father's old desk and laid every piece of evidence out in careful order, the way he had been trained to build a case that could survive scrutiny from any direction. He knew exactly how this would look if he cut a single corner, a deputy chasing down his own stolen property with the full weight of the badge behind him, and he had no intention of giving Linda's family any legitimate grounds to claim bias later on. That discipline, more than anything else, would end up being the single decision that protected him through everything that followed in the weeks ahead. He called Sheriff David Cole directly rather than going through dispatch, laying out what he had and asking that the case be assigned to someone other than himself, since he had no intention of investigating his own theft under any circumstances. Cole, 58 years old and no stranger to the Morrison name around town, agreed without hesitation and told Jack to bring in everything he had by the end of the day. A neighbor named Sarah Bennett, 38 years old, who lived 2 lots down from the association office, came forward on her own that same afternoon, telling deputies she had seen Ethan's truck pulling the flatbed trailer down the access road well after midnight, headlights off the whole way. By early evening, a marked patrol unit turned off the main road and rolled slowly into the entrance of the subdivision, past the manicured lawns and matching mailboxes, headed straight for the association office at the center of the neighborhood. The deputies who arrived were not from Jack's usual shift, and that was intentional, since Sheriff Cole wanted no room for anyone to claim the investigation was personal in any way. Linda watched the patrol car pull up and felt the first flicker of something other than confidence, though she covered it quickly with the same composed smile she used for every difficult homeowner meeting she had ever chaired. Ethan, leaning against the porch railing with a drink in his hand, told the deputies it was all a misunderstanding, that the tractor had simply been moved for maintenance reasons and would be returned whenever it was convenient for everyone involved. The lead investigator was not particularly interested in convenience. He asked politely but firmly for access to the association's maintenance building, the same locked structure Sarah had described seeing the trailer pull toward 2 nights earlier under cover of darkness. Linda refused outright, citing some vague clause about private association property that she could not actually name when pressed for specifics, and insisted the deputies had no right to search anything without a proper warrant first. That refusal, more than anything Jack had presented so far, told the investigators exactly what they needed to know about where this case was headed. Within 2 hours, a judge had signed off on the warrant, and deputies pried open the maintenance building doors to find the tractor sitting exactly where Ethan had hidden it 2 nights before. The fender Jack had watched grow up alongside him now carried a long, fresh scrape where the paint had been scraped down to bare metal, and the rear license plate had been unbolted and tossed carelessly onto a nearby workbench beside a coil of rope. One investigator crouched to check the serial number against the registration Jack had provided earlier that day, confirming what everyone already suspected, while another turned toward Ethan and began reading him his rights in a flat, unhurried voice that carried clearly across the quiet building. Ethan's face went pale in a way it hadn't during any of his earlier bravado at the office that morning, and for the first time since the party where he had boasted about owning the whole street someday, he had absolutely nothing to say for himself. One deputy photographed the scraped fender from 3 angles, while another bagged the license plate as evidence, noting the coil of rope and a pair of work gloves left behind on the same workbench, small details that would matter later when the timeline needed to be nailed down beyond any doubt. Linda arrived at the maintenance building minutes after the search began, having been called by a panicked neighbor, and stood at the edge of the gravel lot watching deputies carry her son's mistakes out into the daylight one piece at a time. She did not try to stop them. She simply stood there, arms folded, her expression shifting from disbelief to something colder and far more calculating, the look of a woman already rewriting the story in her head before the deputies had even finished loading the tractor onto a county trailer for return to its rightful owner. Linda, however, was only getting started, and her silence lasted exactly as long as it took her to reach her phone. Within days, she had hired a lawyer from 2 counties over, a sharp-suited man who specialized in filing complaints against law enforcement, and together, they crafted a narrative that painted Jack as a vengeful deputy, abusing his badge to settle a personal property dispute with a neighbor he simply did not like. Word spread through the subdivision quickly, the way it always does in a place where everyone knows everyone's business. And residents split into 2 camps almost overnight, some quietly supporting Jack based on what they had actually witnessed, others swayed entirely by Linda's insistence that this was retaliation dressed up as justice. The Morrison camp pushed the story hard, claiming Jack had orchestrated the entire investigation himself out of resentment over years of code violations he had received, and Sheriff Cole's office opened an internal review simply to be thorough and above reproach. Investigators unconnected to the county pored over dispatch recordings, radio logs, and shift schedules for nearly 2 weeks, treating the internal review with the same seriousness they would give any outside complaint against a fellow officer. They interviewed Sheriff Cole, the lead investigator who had executed the warrant, and even the judge who had signed off on the search, each of them independently confirming the same sequence of events without a single inconsistency between their accounts. That review turned out to be the worst thing Linda could have asked for, because every camera log, every timestamp, and every report confirmed that Jack had removed himself from the case the moment he changed out of his work clothes that morning. He had not requested the warrant, had not entered the maintenance building, and had not spoken to Ethan even once since walking out of the association office that first morning the tractor went missing. The lawyer's confident tone began to shift once he reviewed the paperwork himself, slowly realizing his client had handed him a case built entirely on a story that collapsed under the weight of its own timeline the moment anyone actually checked it. And then, almost as if the truth simply refused to stay buried any longer, a second piece of footage surfaced, this time from a camera Ethan himself had installed near the association office months earlier to monitor complaints. One, he had apparently forgotten, still recorded audio, along with the video. The footage showed Linda standing in her kitchen the night before the theft, telling Ethan in plain, unhurried terms to simply go get the tractor and stop worrying so much about the consequences of his actions. Ethan could be heard asking what would happen if Jack decided to sue over it afterward, and Linda's response, delivered without a moment's hesitation, was that the association would protect him no matter what he did, because that was exactly what she had built the organization to do from the very beginning. In the same recording, mother and son discussed other ways to pressure Jack into selling his land, floating ideas about tightening code enforcement until he had no reasonable choice left but to give up and move somewhere else entirely. Investigators played the recording for Sheriff Cole personally before releasing it to the broader case file, and even he, a man who had heard plenty of ugly things over 3 decades in law enforcement, admitted the casual cruelty in Linda's tone was harder to listen to than he expected. It was not shouted or angry, which somehow made it worse. Delivered instead, in the same flat, business-like voice she used to discuss landscaping budgets, as though ruining a man's livelihood were simply another item on her weekly agenda. That single recording did more damage to Linda's credibility than anything Jack could have said in a courtroom full of witnesses. Investigators, now looking more closely at the association's history, began fielding calls from other residents who suddenly felt safe coming forward with stories of their own that they had kept quiet for years. One family described a riding mower that disappeared for 2 weeks after a landscaping dispute over hedge height, only to reappear quietly once they finally stopped asking questions about where it had gone. Another resident recalled more. My Mackie more the sixes, likes Animad. A contractor working on a nearby remodel said several pallets of lumber had gone missing from a driveway after Linda complained about an unapproved addition to a garage that had not yet been finished. An elderly couple who had lived in the subdivision since it first opened described a wood chipper towed away during a dispute over a fallen tree limb, a machine they never saw again despite paying the full replacement value out of their own pocket rather than fight the association over it. A young couple with a newborn recalled being fined repeatedly over a baby swing left visible in the backyard, fines that mysteriously stopped appearing on their account only after they agreed to volunteer for 3 landscaping committees in a row. Each story on its own might have been dismissed as coincidence or simple misunderstanding, but together they formed a pattern too consistent to ignore any longer, and the sheriff's office found itself buried under a steady stream of new complaints within a single week. What had started as one stolen tractor was quickly becoming something much larger and far more serious, a portrait of an association that had spent years treating its own residents as subjects rather than neighbors deserving of basic respect. The town called a general meeting soon after, packing the community center with more people than the building had seen in years, all of them eager to hear how their president planned to explain herself in front of everyone she had spent years intimidating. Linda arrived dressed sharply, prepared to project the same authority she always had at every meeting before this one, and she opened by insisting the entire situation had been blown wildly out of proportion by a deputy with a personal grudge against her family. Jack, sitting quietly near the back in plain clothes rather than uniform, waited patiently until the floor opened for questions before finally standing to speak in front of the crowd. He did not raise his voice or accuse anyone of anything beyond what the evidence already showed clearly. He simply set up a small projector and walked the room through the same evidence the investigators had already reviewed: the camera footage of the theft, the recording of Linda's instructions to her son, the paper trail of confiscated property from other residents, and the timeline proving he had stepped away from his own case the exact moment it became personal. The room grew quieter with every slide he showed, the kind of silence that comes when people realize they had believed a story built entirely on someone else's confidence rather than any actual verifiable facts. By the time Jack finished speaking, several residents who had defended Linda for years were the first to demand a vote of no confidence, unwilling to let embarrassment keep them loyal to someone who had clearly used the association as a personal weapon against her own neighbors. Linda tried one last time to regain control of the room, standing abruptly and insisting that everyone present owed her their homes, their property values, and their peace of mind, since none of it would exist without the rules she had enforced for years. Nobody clapped, nobody agreed. A man near the front, who had once served on her landscaping committee without complaint, stood up and asked her plainly whether protecting the neighborhood had ever really been the point, or whether the neighborhood had simply been a convenient excuse for something else entirely. Linda had no answer for him, and the silence that followed said more than any rebuttal could have. The vote passed by an overwhelming margin, stripping Linda of her position on the spot, and the board scheduled new elections for the following month under closer county oversight to prevent anything similar from happening again. Ethan, already facing formal charges connected to the theft and the damage to Jack's property, sat through the meeting saying nothing at all, the confidence that had defined him at his own party now nowhere to be found in his posture. In the weeks that followed, a routine financial audit requested as part of the fraud complaints turned up exactly the kind of irregularities that seasoned investigators expect, but rarely find so cleanly documented in one place. Association dues that residents had paid faithfully for years appeared to have been funneled into vendor contracts with companies that, upon closer inspection, did not seem to actually exist beyond a mailing address and a single bank account. The forensic accountant assigned to the case, a methodical woman who had spent a decade untangling small-town financial fraud across the region, told investigators she had rarely seen a scheme this careless, built more on the assumption that nobody would ever look closely than on any real sophistication. Fine payments collected for supposed code violations were never logged in any official ledger anywhere, meaning thousands of dollars had simply disappeared without explanation over the course of several years. One landscaping contract alone showed nearly 4 times the going rate for services that neighbors confirmed were never fully completed in the first place. Linda found herself facing charges far more serious than anything connected to the tractor alone: financial fraud and embezzlement tied directly to funds meant for community maintenance, along with obstruction charges stemming from her refusal to cooperate during the original search of the maintenance building. At her arraignment, dressed far more modestly than anyone in town had ever seen her, she pleaded not guilty through her lawyer, while reporters from 2 regional papers waited outside the courthouse steps, a sight that would have been unimaginable to her only months earlier. Her lawyer, the same sharp-suited man who had once promised to destroy Jack's reputation, quietly requested to withdraw from the financial portion of the case once he reviewed the full scope of the vendor contracts, telling the court he could no longer in good conscience represent claims he knew to be indefensible. Ethan's charges expanded as well, once investigators confirmed the extent of the damage to Jack's property and established a clear pattern of intent rather than the simple misunderstanding his lawyer had originally tried to argue on his behalf. Jack, meanwhile, was formally cleared of every accusation the Morrison camp had thrown at him during those difficult weeks, the internal review closing with a conclusion that praised the exact restraint that had frustrated Linda from the very beginning of this entire ordeal. One elderly resident, a retired schoolteacher who had signed an early petition supporting Linda's version of events, drove out to the farm personally, with a pie balanced on the passenger seat, saying she had not felt right about it since the night of the community meeting and wanted to make amends properly rather than simply avoid him at the mailbox from then on. Another neighbor, a young father who had let his children repeat some of the ugliest rumors circulating about Jack, sat down with him on the porch steps one evening and admitted plainly that he had chosen convenience over curiosity, believing the loudest voice rather than asking a single honest question first. Residents who had once sided with the association's version of events began approaching Jack individually to apologize, some sheepishly, some tearfully, admitting they should have questioned the story sooner instead of assuming a badge automatically meant abuse of power on his part. He accepted each apology without holding on to resentment, understanding that fear of an association willing to punish dissent had kept plenty of good people quiet far longer than they were proud of, admitting out loud. As the investigation wound down and formal charges moved through the court system, the town scheduled one final gathering, this time not to accuse anyone further, but to close the chapter properly and let the community hear directly from the man who had started it all simply by refusing to sell his own land. The tractor, fully restored down to the fender that had been scraped bare that night in the maintenance building, sat gleaming near the front of the community center, the day of that final gathering, returned to Jack exactly as his father had left it to him years earlier. Farm life resumed its normal rhythm, not long after the trial dates were set, rows planted on schedule, fences repaired along the eastern line, the equipment shed locked each evening out of habit more than any real fear now. A newly elected board took over the association within weeks, made up of residents who had specifically campaigned on transparency, open financial records, and a firm promise that no single person would ever again hold that much unchecked power over their neighbors. The new president, a retired schoolteacher who had lived in the subdivision since it opened, but had always avoided association politics, insisted on publishing every dollar spent in a monthly newsletter mailed to every household without exception. Fines, when issued at all, now required 2 board signatures and a documented explanation before they could be enforced, a small procedural change that residents joked should have existed from the very first day the neighborhood was built. Sarah Bennett had spent that uneasy week after the confrontation at the office, weighing what she owed her neighbors against what she owed the truth, and in the end the truth won out easily once she thought it through honestly. She called the sheriff's office herself, without anyone asking her to, and told the deputy who answered exactly what she had seen the night the trailer passed her house, description, timestamp, and all. It was a small thing to her at the time, a single phone call made from her kitchen table, but it turned out to be one of the threads that held the entire case together when Linda's lawyer tried to poke holes in the timeline later on. Once the dust from the trial had settled, Sarah organized a small work crew of neighbors to help repair the section of fence line that had been damaged during the initial theft, showing up one Saturday morning with tools and enough hands to finish the job before lunch. What had once been a hostile boundary between 2 feuding sides slowly became something closer to an actual community, people from both the subdivision and the farm working side by side without anyone keeping score of who owed whom an apology anymore. Sheriff Cole stopped by the farm personally to commend Jack for the way he had handled the entire situation from beginning to end, noting that plenty of deputies would have let personal frustration cloud their judgment, but Jack had chosen the harder, slower path of letting the facts carry the weight instead of his own anger. Cole mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that the department had already fielded 3 calls from nearby counties, asking how the case had been built so cleanly, curious whether Jack would be willing to speak to newer deputies about the value of stepping back from a case the moment it turned personal. Jack said he would think about it, though everyone standing there could tell from his expression that he already knew his answer, the same quiet certainty he carried into most decisions that actually mattered to him. Ethan's case moved through the court system more slowly than his mother's, complicated by the sheer number of charges stacked against him: theft, property damage, and eventually a tampering charge. Once investigators traced the removed license plate to a drainage ditch, a half-mile from the maintenance building, where he had tossed it weeks earlier, hoping it would never surface. He pleaded guilty rather than risk a trial, once his own recorded conversation with his mother became part of the public record, a decision his new lawyer described simply as the only sensible option left on the table. The judge who sentenced him made a point of noting that entitlement was not a defense, and that a grown man who had never once considered the consequences of his actions was exactly the kind of case the system existed to correct before real harm multiplied further. Linda's sentencing came weeks later, the financial charges carrying the heaviest weight of everything she faced, restitution ordered to every resident whose funds had been misused across the years she had controlled the association's books without meaningful oversight from anyone. Standing near the tractor that evening, dust settling in the low orange light as the sun dropped toward the tree line, Jack told the small crowd gathered there that power was never really about making people afraid of you in the first place. Real power, he said, was choosing to respect the law even in the moment it would have been easiest to bend it in his own favor, especially when the law happened to be standing entirely on his side already. It was a simple thought, delivered without any performance behind it, but it landed with the kind of weight that only comes from a man who had actually lived every word of it rather than simply repeating something he had heard elsewhere. Someone in the crowd asked him quietly whether he had ever considered simply selling the land and moving somewhere easier, somewhere without fences to fight over or committees to answer to every other week. Jack thought about it for a moment before answering, glancing back at the farmhouse his father had built with his own hands. The same house Jack had grown up in, and never once imagined leaving no matter how many notices arrived in the mailbox. He said the easiest path was rarely the right one, and that his father had taught him a long time ago that land worth keeping was almost always land worth defending properly, through patience rather than anger, through evidence rather than volume. The crowd was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that comes when people hear something they already suspected but had never quite put into words themselves. A young boy near the front, the son of one of the newer families in the subdivision, asked whether the tractor still worked the same as before, unaware of anything beyond the simple question of whether a broken thing could be made whole again. Jack smiled at that, the first easy smile most of them had seen from him in months, and told the boy it ran better than ever, since his father had always believed that anything worth having was worth taking care of properly, season after season, without exception. The following morning, mist still hanging low over the fields, Jack climbed into the tractor and started the same engine his father had once started decades earlier, guiding it slowly across the open rows as the sun climbed steadily over the horizon behind him. Neighbors who had once crossed the street to avoid him now stood along the fence line and waved as he passed, some calling out greetings, a few simply lifting a hand in quiet acknowledgement of everything that had changed since that first stolen morning months earlier. Sarah Bennett stood among them with a cup of coffee in hand, watching the tractor cut its familiar path through the soil, thinking about how strange it was that a single phone call from her kitchen table had helped set so much right in a town that had spent years looking the other way. Even the newly elected board members, gathered nearby for an early meeting about the fall maintenance schedule, paused to watch the tractor pass, a small, unspoken acknowledgement that the man who had refused to sell his land had ultimately given the whole neighborhood something it never knew it needed, a reason to trust each other again. The scene, if anyone had been filming it, would have pulled slowly back from the farmhouse and the fields stretching out around it, wide and unbroken beneath the early light, leaving behind a single truth the whole town now understood clearly and would not soon forget. No family name, no committee, and no title ever placed anyone above the law, no matter how many rules they thought they had written for themselves over the years, and no matter how many people they had once convinced to believe it.